Shabbat Shalom. Imagine a world where each day is referred to by a number. The number stands for the number of days hostages are being held in captivity. Not a day goes by without the awareness that one of your own is not there. They're not free. Welcome to Israel. Day number 21 in captivity was the day I was leaving for Israel. I stopped to study the faces of the kidnapped on the red posters plastered all over the corner wall at 79th and Broadway in New York City. Some said, "Thank God, home safe." Others sadly said, "Murdered." Some posters were ripped, and there was a sticker on in its place calling out that an anti-Semite had torn it off. My thoughts and prayers were interrupted by an American-Israeli influencer wearing the number 121. That's the number of days in captivity. She asked me to video her as she spoke to her 20,000 followers. When I told her I was leaving for Israel that very same day, she thanked me on her broadcast for supporting Israel and closed with, "Bring them home now," and "Am Israel Chai," Israel lives. This became a familiar, heartfelt refrain throughout our trip from everyone we encountered. "Thank you for coming. Am Israel Chai." I'll tell you one experience from our mission that I will never forget. It's actually the saddest, and I'm sorry I'm starting with this because it wasn't all like this, but I thought you should know. Day number 25 of captivity. We drove to Kibbutz Kfar Asa to bear witness to the atrocities perpetrated on October 7th. The kibbutz is a lush farming community located along the Gaza border. Chen, a longtime resident of the kibbutz, guided us along through the ravaged community. She knew all the families intimately. The morning of October 7th, 600 community members were home. Chen happened to be on vacation in Portugal when she got a frantic early morning call from her father that the kibbutz had been ambushed by paragliders and terrorists that were dressed in Israeli Defense Force IDF uniforms. The fence that separated their community from Gaza was compromised in 40 places. She was told terrorists were everywhere. Usually, the military sends red alert messages to the security teams of each kibbutz. But on this day, there were no messages. They were unaware that the IDF military base in the region was under siege, and Hamas terrorists had infiltrated, killed, or captured countless number of IDF soldiers. On this horrific day, also known as Israel's Black Sabbath, Hamas was organized and prepared. The terrorists knew their way around the kibbutz. They knew where the weapons were stored. They knew where the first responders were. They knew where everybody lived. The kibbutz first responders security team was murdered. Chen said they were betrayed by the Palestinians that they had employed for many years. The terrorists went from house to house and murdered, burned, tortured, and kidnapped. In the end, 65 were murdered and 18 were taken hostage to Gaza. Although she was in Portugal, Chen was in constant communication with the IDF and used the kibbutz WhatsApp group chat to guide and direct from afar. Her father survived, and so did her sister, who was in a safe room with 12 others for 12 torturous hours. Our hearts sank as we followed Chen along the death trail through the kibbutz. We witnessed the devastations of homes burned, ransacked, and riddled with bullets and shrapnel from grenades. It was a multi-sensory experience for us. We saw with our own eyes the complete and utter destruction of Chen's community. We heard in the distance the IDF bombings in Gaza. We smelled the smoke. We tasted the salty tears on our cheeks. We walked around her community of family and friends as Chen told us stories about them and their fates. Posters with the names and pictures of the murdered and kidnapped were displayed in front of their burnt and desecrated homes. It is hard to fathom how anyone could return to such a place of horror. The people we encountered in Israel were consistently strong, resilient, and brave. Chen was no exception. She planned to stay. She chose to return because this is her home. Everyone asked, where else would I go? They know about anti-Semitism all over the world, and this is a home for the Jews. This is where they want to stay, and they want to keep their home, and they want to keep their home safe. She thanked us for coming. Am Israel Chai. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. When the opportunity arose for a visit to Israel with Rabbi Yoshi and Jacqueline, I realized that the timing worked and jumped on board as I wanted to lend support and assistance to the Israeli people whom I hold dear to my heart, and to bear witness to the pain and suffering inflicted upon them on October 7th. In addition, I have been consumed by concern about our country's biased and one-sided media coverage of the post-October 7th events towards Israel, as well as the resultant shocking rise in anti-Semitism that has reared its ugly head across the world, really, seemingly in support of a terrorist group's senseless, brutal attack on a civilian population. How could this be? Certainly not in our freedom-loving country. It feels to me that I have been living in an alternate universe since returning home from a vacation last October 23rd. But that's another topic for another conversation. Rabbi Yoshi asked me to reflect upon our temple's solidarity mission and to recall an experience that particularly impacted me. To be honest, I've been having difficulty selecting just one and have decided to focus on my most significant takeaway from our trip. Many have asked me, why would you go to Israel during a war? It quickly became evident that to bear witness was the very least we could do. We were profoundly impacted by our experiences, each one of us in the Stephen Weiss contingent. Everywhere we went, every person we spoke with, from the brave and resilient farmer in the Gaza envelope, Uri, whose daughter-in-law lost her sister and husband during the massacre at the kibbutz Kfar Aza, which Stacey spoke about, leaving behind 10-month-old twins, to the IDF soldiers and Nova Music Festival victims recovering from their injuries in the Gaza war, to Barak Benjamin, an evacuee of Moshav Netiv HaSarah and brother-in-law of our guide, currently residing with his family in a hotel in Tel Aviv for the past 4 months, to relatives of the hostages that we met at Captive Square in Tel Aviv. Each person we encountered thanked us for being there, for helping and supporting them, and told us repeatedly how our support gives them strength and how much it meant to feel our presence and know that Jews around the world supported them. It gave me a great deal of comfort to be there with them at this difficult time. when so many of us feel helpless, and reminded me how important showing up can be. Many asked us how we were doing. Many Israelis asked us how we were doing with the terrible increase in anti-Semitism in America. They were worried about us. What I found was a brave, resilient, proud, resolute, and hopeful, yes, hopeful people who love and celebrate life and family and community, even now, and who only want to live in peace and harmony with their neighbors. I'm trying to figure out how I can do more to help, in some small way, to correct the inaccurate perceptions and deceptive news reporting of the reality of the situation there. Because I really don't understand how most Western news outlets can be so anti-Israel and seemingly forget in their reporting that there was relative peace in the region on October 6th. I realized that we are all mishpacha, we Jews, that there is an unbreakable bond between us, and that this trip to Israel communicated that in a meaningful and impactful way. What I also found was a wonderful group of new friends that I was blessed to experience this journey with, several of whom are here tonight, and I know others are watching on the Zoom, and came away with shared memories of a lifetime together. Am Yisrael Hai.
Shabbat Shalom.
Stand right there.
I'm guessing that most of you don't know this, but Rabbi Yoshi and I have a lot in common. We were both born in Colorado, raised in Nebraska, and are Israeli citizens. Crazy, right? Oh, and he also is super handsome. We have different strengths as well. He gives some amazing sermons, and I perform some amazing colonoscopies. Jews were, and still are, a small minority in Nebraska, and mine was the only Israeli family in Lincoln for quite a few years. My mother was born in Haifa, and my father made Aliyah from India as a teenager. However, I was fortunate enough to have visited Israel many times during my childhood. For my first trip, even as a toddler, I swear when I arrived there I thought, oh my God, people here look just like me. They're speaking Hebrew everywhere, the food is ridiculously good, and my mom is so happy here. I mean, what is happening? In the most unsophisticated terms to a little kid, my question was, you mean we have a place of our own too? It was absolutely magical. It was only much later that I learned from history books the struggle it took to get there. So when October 7th happened, I wanted to help Israel in some way, and there are several organizations that facilitate doctors from around the world to come to Israel to give respite to physician soldiers. But as it turns out, the Israeli Ministry of Health has no use for additional doctors who perform amazing colonoscopies. And it also turns out that of a population of nearly 10 million Israeli citizens, exactly 5 million are doctors. Then my wife, Lori, my sister-in-law, Pam, and I saw the email inviting us to come to Israel on a solidarity mission with Rabbi Yoshi and Jacqueline. We reviewed the itinerary, but we honestly didn't know what to expect. There were worthy Israeli relief organizations to which we could just donate, so why go in the middle of a war? We weren't frightened, we just didn't know if anyone was in the mood to see us. But reading about the war online and watching stories about it on the news night after night left us with damaged spirits, and we ultimately decided that since Israel is part of who we are, we should go seek our own refuat hanefesh, or healing of our spirits. From the minute we landed in Israel, we were in awe of the resilience and bravery of the Israeli people. Don't get me wrong, Many of the stories we heard and aftermath we witnessed from survivors of the massacre at both the Nova Music Festival and Kibbutz Kfar Aza were heartbreaking, and seeing a young woman on her hands and knees sobbing at the grave of a newly fallen soldier at Mount Herzl was perhaps the most gut-wrenching moment I've ever experienced. But time and time again, we heard the hope of the Israeli people, and ironically, I think we received as much comfort from Israelis as they received from us. Wherever we traveled, from relatives to farmers to bus drivers and to evacuees returning home for the first time in months, we were definitely thanked profusely for coming, that it meant so much to them to show we cared, but we were also asked how we were doing and how anti-Semitism affected us back home. While we visited wounded soldiers at Ichilov Hospital in Tel Aviv, one particular wounded officer, less than half my age, had a message for us. "Listen," he said, "I don't want you to go back to the United States with frowns on your faces. You go home and you tell your friends, Al tidagu, אנחנו עושים עבודה מצוינת וננצח," which means, don't worry, we're doing a great job and we're going to win. I mean, how Israeli is that? So what does winning mean? Right now, all over Israel, there are billboards and bumper stickers with the slogan, Biyachad ninatzeach. The literal translation is, together we will win. In this context, to me, the we doesn't refer just to soldiers, and it doesn't refer just to Israelis. It also refers to supporters of Israel worldwide, you and me. And the winning doesn't refer just to defeating Hamas and rescuing the hostages. It refers to a longer-term aim of lasting peace. These objectives can be accomplished only by working together with a common goal. Last Shabbat morning, Lori, my Israeli cousin Rakefet, her husband Nisim, and I took advantage of the amazing opportunity to join Jacqueline and Rabbi Yoshi for a running cultural tour of parts of Jerusalem, including the Old City, with super guide Yael Goodman. Though it isn't always so, that day was a particularly peaceful and beautiful one, and I reflected on the sacrifices of those who made it possible for us to have it. The magic of Israel comes at a heavy cost, but it is still magical. And the spirit of those who made it possible hasn't been broken. So, my message to you is to go to Israel. You need her as much as she needs you, and don't be afraid to travel there. If you are, the bad guys win. Bear witness, speak and advocate loudly, positively, and with pride. Listen, spend lots and lots of money, and contribute to the economy. Feel the magic and experience your own refuat hanefesh. Shabbat shalom.